So on 18th of August, Netaji was dead, and the Japanese publicized the news of his death in the plane crash on 23rd August. A series of investigations by the British government, by the American government, and by the Indian government continued. None of these established conclusively Bose's death. Until date, none of these governments claim that they have the definitive proof of Subhash's death. It is only the Indian government and some specific Indians who have stuck to the story, and most notably those associated with the Congress party. The commissions of inquiry, which were appointed by the Congress governments, reached the same conclusion by hook or by crook. And when another commission of inquiry, the third official inquiry by the government of India, reached the conclusion that Subhash Bose did not die in the alleged plane crash on 18th of August, the Congress government overruled it. It rejected the findings of the report. Despite the Congress government's, successive Congress government's insistence that Bose died in that plane crash, people of the country have refused to accept it. Yet the Congress governments, and very curiously, even the current BJP government, have adhered to the same old story. In fact, there has been a resurgence of late among a few individuals, especially those belonging to the extended Bose family, to insist that all the inquiries done over the years, starting with the Allied intelligence inquiries, Indian inquiries like Shanwas Committee, the Khosla Commission, etc., they have provided irrefutable proof, evidence that Netaji died in that plane crash. The other standard and consistent argument of the Congress party and the Congress governments have been that the biggest proof of Netaji's death in the plane crash was the number of eyewitnesses. There were so many eyewitnesses who told the story as they saw it. Of course, there have been some minor discrepancies among their versions, their accounts. So the argument here is that the main story is consistent, that Netaji reached Taihoku, he spent some time there, and when the plane took off, it crashed. Netaji was brought to the hospital and he died there, was cremated after a few days. That is the main story. So some minor discrepancies among witness accounts should not make any difference. That is the argument, has been the argument of successive governments. So as we have already seen that there were about 14 or 15 passengers in the plane which is said to have crashed. Now, out of those 14 or 15, apparently there were around 7 survivors. Of these 7, 6 appeared before various inquiries. Now, the first thing that strikes us when we look at the division of passenger and crew, we find that those who were going to Manchuria were dead, and those who were going to Tokyo were all alive. Now, on the point of fading memories due to lapse of time, it should be clearly kept in mind that these people were not being interrogated for the first time in 1956. The interrogations started right from towards the end of 1945, pretty soon after the alleged plane crash took place. Now, before we move ahead to analyze the various witness statements and accounts, we need to understand who were these eyewitnesses. Now, if you look closely at this diagram, you will see that there were about 30 odd eyewitnesses who appeared in front of various inquiries. Among these 30 odd witnesses, apart from the plane crash survivors, the 6 survivors, there were only 5 more people who claimed to have either seen the plane crash or reached the site after the plane crashed. That is, somebody who saw the crash site. Among all these people, other than the plane crash survivors, only one person had known Netaji beforehand. Only one person, Juichi Nakamura. We will discuss him in the later stages. Nobody else knew Netaji, not a single person. Everybody was shown one person and told that this is Subhash Chandra Bose. And many others did not even get to see any Subhash Chandra Bose, they just heard the story. So this is the distribution of witness. And you will remember that among the plane crash survivors, none of them had known Netaji beforehand, except Habibur. The Japanese survivors, none of them knew Netaji. They were told, they met Netaji for the first time at Saigon before the plane took off. This is a very, very critical aspect that needs to be kept in mind. So when the doctors who claimed that they had treated Subhash Chandra Bose, they did not know Subhash Chandra Bose. They were told that this is Subhash Chandra Bose. The local army officers who came to visit Subhash Chandra Bose in the hospital saw somebody lied up, totally bandaged, face covered, head covered, the whole body bandaged. They were told that, look, that is Subhash Chandra Bose. So the entire chain of events involves people who did not know Subhash Chandra Bose at all. Now let's take up the witness accounts. For the sake of convenience, let's take point by point, issue by issue, and then I leave it to you to decide whether these are minor discrepancies. The first thing that comes to notice when we go through the witness statements is that there was no one to receive Netaji and the other team members at Taihoku airport. That appears a little strange. He was, after all, the head of a state. This was explained by Nonogaki. He said that when it was decided that the plane would not stop at Haito but would fly directly from Turen to Taihoku, Taihoku was not informed. So there was a flight plan, a fixed flight plan. It was changed, but the airport authorities were not informed. Sounds odd, no? This does not involve lapse in memory. This is a pure strange occurrence. The second point that I would like to present to you is also not involved with fading or failing memory. It's about a conversation that Keikichi Arai overheard, a conversation between Netaji and Habib. Habib never mentioned any of it, but Arai told the Shanwas committee about this. He overheard Netaji telling Habib that he didn't want to go to Dairen anymore. He wanted the plane to land in Mukden, a few hundred miles north of Dairen. At what time did the flight arrive at Taihoku, and at what time did it take off? According to Nonogaki, the flight arrived around noon and it took off around 2 p.m. According to Takahashi, the flight arrived around 11 and took off around 12:30, between 12:30 and 1 p.m. Tadeo Sakai said that the flight arrived at noon, but it took off around 1 p.m. The same time was given by Keikichi Arai. Habib, on the other hand, said that the flight arrived at 2 p.m. and they spent just about half an hour in the aerodrome and it took off around 2:35. Now let's keep one thing in mind when we are going through all these statements. These people are battle-worn military officers. These are not just common lay person who would be overwhelmed by their surroundings or whatever is happening around them. These are military men. They have a sense of time. They are trained to go through difficult situations and they know what they're talking about. And these people, these trained military officers, some of them are saying that they spent half an hour, some of them are saying they spent 1 hour, and some of them are saying they spent 2 hours, as if they have no sense of time. Now, once the flight took off, before it crashed, what height did it gain? From what kind of height did it fall? According to Nonogaki, the flight hardly reached about 20 meters. Taro Kono said it was about 30 meters. Tadeo Sakai said about 50 meters. Keikichi Arai said about 500 meters. The in charge of the aerodrome, Captain Nakamura, also known as Yamamoto, said that he was observing the flight from the aerodrome from outside. The others were passengers inside the flight. Yamamoto said that the flight attained a height of about 30 to 40 meters. Now, the most diverse range of heights come from Habibur Rahman. First, when he talked to SAIR after he reached Japan in September 1945, Habib said the flight reached anything between 2,200 to 3,000 feet. Now, 3,000 feet is equivalent to over 900 meters. Now, compare that 900 meters with the 30 to 40 meters of Nakamura with 20 meters of Nonogaki. 20 meters and 900 meters. The same Habib told the CSDIC that the flight attained a height of 300 feet. That's around 91 meters. And then again, when he talked to the Shanavas committee, he told them that the height attained was about 1,000 feet, which is about 300, just about 300 meters. One can understand the variation, say between 20 meters, 30 meters, 90 meters, even 100 meters. But it's difficult to understand, it's difficult to appreciate when that 100 meters becomes a kilometer. That's exactly what Habib did. Now, whether to call this a minor discrepancy, I leave to you. So how did the plane fall? Now, if you remember, Habib informed the Shanavas committee that he heard a deafening noise from the starboard side of the plane. The starboard side is the right side of the plane. But to the CSDIC, when he had spoken to them, Habib had said the noise came from the nose of the plane. Nonogaki said that the plane fell on its right side. Major Kono said the same thing. The plane fell on its right and the right wing was completely smashed. Takahashi, on the other hand, said that the plane fell on its nose. Yamamoto, who was sitting outside on the aerodrome, said that the plane fell on its left side, on its left wing. Left, right. Which wing smashed? Which wing broke? Left or right? Where did the plane crash? According to Habib, the plane fell 1 or 2 miles outside the airfield. 1 or 2 miles outside the airfield. Nonogaki said that the plane crashed on the runway. Takahashi said not exactly the runway, just ahead of the runway on the ground. Tadao Sakai said it crashed at the end of the airfield. According to Nakamura or Yamamoto, just at the boundary of the aerodrome. Okay, so wherever the plane fell, it fell. Now what happened after it fell? If you remember that Habib had told the Shanawaz committee that the plane split, the fore portion of the plane split. And when Netaji was trying to come out of the plane from the rear door, he stopped Netaji and told him, "Aage se nikliye, piche se rasta nahi hai." So Netaji went ahead and got out of the plane from the front where the plane had split. He jumped through the fire, rushed through the fire, which was 2 to 3 feet long. It was a pretty graphic description. Now, when the same Habib was interrogated by the CSDIC, he told them that he did not mention any split in the fore portion of the plane. He said that the celluloid cover on top of the pilot had burst open. Netaji climbed out of the open part of the celluloid cover on top of the pilot. Lapse of memory? Nonogaki was sitting near the turret. Nonogaki said that the plane split into 2. The plane split into 2 and he was thrown out. This is where Nonogaki was sitting, and according to him, this is where the plane split. Taro Kono, on the other hand, said that the plane split at one point and it curved inside at another point, points A and B in this diagram. He broke open the plastic cover, the celluloid cover, and escaped from there. Kono was sitting between the pilot and Netaji. So who escaped first, Netaji or Kono? It appears that both of them went out through the same route. Heikichi Arai, he said that the plane split at the middle. The plane was split into 2 equal parts. And since he was sitting at the rear part of the plane, he was also thrown out. Takahashi and Tadao Sakai, these two, lost consciousness due to the impact of the plane on the ground, and they didn't remember anything. When Takahashi regained consciousness, he found himself lying outside the plane. Probably he was also thrown out. Sakai, however, regained consciousness very quickly and he ran out of the plane. He didn't specify how or from where. Now the man who was sitting outside, Yamamoto, he said that the plane was intact. There was no split at all. And he went and rescued the passengers from the rear door. So the 6 passengers alive and Nakamura, were they going through the same experience? Or were they present at the same place? It's difficult to accept. It's difficult to understand. The plane split at the front, split in the middle, or towards the rear portion, or it didn't split at all. Minor discrepancies. Now what happened to Netaji? How did he get out? Again, I ask you to recall what Habib told the Shanawaz committee. Netaji was trying to go towards the rear of the plane, but Habib told him, "Idhar se nahi, aage se nikliye, piche se rasta nahi hai." Once he got out of the plane, he saw Netaji standing about 10 yards ahead of him, looking towards the west, standing with his clothes on fire. And then, with great difficulty, he opened the belt of the bush coat that Netaji was wearing. Now, there is a slight problem. When the Americans had interrogated him in Ramamurthy's house in September 1945, Habib had told them a completely different story. He told them that he had no idea how Netaji got out of the plane. And when he emerged from the plane, he saw Netaji lying down with his clothes on fire. And then he went and removed his clothes. In front of the Shanawaz committee, Nonogaki also gave the same story which Habib said. He told the committee that when he saw Netaji for the first time after the crash, he found him standing with his clothes on fire and Habib trying to take out his clothes. But in 1946, when he had spoken to Colonel Figgs, at that time he told Figgs that Netaji had put on a tight-fitting jacket because of the cold. आपको कैसे पता चला ननोगा कि भैया? Because Habib said that he had given the pullover to Netaji, which Netaji refused to wear. So when did Netaji put it on, and how did it escape Habib's notice? Not only this, to Figs, Nonogaki said that he joined Habib in beating out the flames from Netaji's clothes. And when it was not possible to take out his clothes, Netaji was taken to an emergency room in the aerodrome where his clothes had to be cut out. Okay. So which one is true? Again, is this minor discrepancy? Now Takahashi. ये भाई सब तो और भी बढ़िया है. He claimed that it was he who took out Netaji's clothes and Habib had no role to play there. Habib was passively standing by. He saw Netaji standing trying to put out the fire. So he went ahead, held Netaji's legs, asked him to roll on the ground, and that's how the fire was put out. And according to Takahashi, not much burn was there. Only patches of his upper clothing were burnt, and his trousers were slightly burnt. So the clothes remained on his body. They were not taken out. One of the biggest proponents of Netaji's death in the plane crash, his biographer Leonard Gordon, who also parrots out the same line that about minor discrepancies. He spoke to Taro Kono, and Taro Kono told him, I will read out. Major Kono, who was lying on the ground a short distance from the plane and saw bows on fire, described him as a living Fudomyo, a Japanese Buddhist temple guardian who is usually represented with fierce visage, hair aflame, face contorted, and weapons in hand. Now let's see what Taro Kono said to the Shanovas committee. Taro Kono said that he saw, when he came to his senses, Netaji standing erect, fully naked. And contrary to the dramatic representation of Leonard Gordon, which he cites as evidence, he didn't see any fire on Netaji's body. His face did not show any signs of pain. But the fun doesn't end here. We still have Nakamura, or Yamamoto, who was in charge of the aerodrome. He claimed that he and two or three of his men rushed towards Netaji and took out his clothes. So Nonogaki says, me. Yamamoto says, no, it's me. Takahashi says, well, it's me. And Habib, of course, says, nobody but me. Minor discrepancy. The surgeon in charge of the hospital where they were all taken, the Nanmon hospital, Dr. T. Yoshimi, he said that Netaji was brought in absolutely naked. He had not a piece of cloth on his body. But we remember that there were some in the airport who said that it was not necessary to take off Netaji's clothes. Now there are certain discrepancies here also about who was taken to the hospital first. Keikichi Arai said that he was the first to arrive in the hospital. Nonogaki said he and Major Kono were the first ones to arrive in the hospital. Dr. Yoshimi said that Habib and Netaji were the first ones to arrive. Similarly, there is also a lot of discrepancy between the accounts, the various accounts about who was taken to which room, which ward, who was kept where, who stayed together and who were separated. But again, that is a minor point, inconsequential. As Netaji arrived with second and third degree burns, Dr. Yoshimi asked Dr. Suruta to apply white ointment on his body. By Dr. Yoshimi's version, I gave him for his heart, one after the other, 4 injections of Vita Camphor and 2 injections of digitamin. I also gave him 3 injections of Ringer solution, 500 cc each one after the other. Dr. Suruta applied white ointment all over his burns and bandaged. While this was being done, I gave Mr. Bose some injections. Dr. Suruta testified that more injections were given to him once he was brought back into the ward from the operation theatre. He said that ointment was applied to his entire body and he was completely bandaged up. Some portion of his chest was left unbandaged, and then he was covered with a white sheet. Dr. Yoshimi claimed that because blood becomes thick due to burning, he took out about 200 cc of blood from Netaji's body and transfused about 400 cc of blood. Dr. Suruta was there with Dr. Yoshimi, but he said that no blood transfusion was given. Habib couldn't even remember whether any blood transfusion was being given or not. Quite odd, no? His supreme commander was being treated. He was constantly on the vigil. And a vital piece of treatment he has no recollection of. There was another doctor in the hospital who gave his version to the Shahnawaz committee, Dr. Ishii. He said he was going around here and there, and he noticed that there was this person lying around on the bed, and the nurse was trying to give some blood transfusion. So he went and helped the nurse, and he took charge of the blood transfusion. And at that time, neither Suruta nor Yoshimi was there. Well and good. So one more version. Now, while all this treatment was going on, some military officers and along with them, Juichi Nakamura, an interpreter who had previously known Netaji and Habibur Rahman, arrived. Now, Nakamura is a very critical character here. We have to pay good attention to his activities, his versions. He worked with the Japanese Foreign Office, and according to Habib, was an intelligence officer. According to Nakamura, Netaji told him that a few more of his men were following him and would soon arrive, and asked him to take care of them. After that, Netaji inquired about General Shidei, but Nakamura had no idea or information about Shidei. He didn't even know him. According to Habib, Netaji asked for Habib Hassan, but he informed Netaji that Hassan was not there. Thereafter, Netaji was completely unconscious. To the Shahnawaz Khan committee, Habib had mentioned that while they lay on the ground in the airport, waiting for the medical help to arrive, Netaji gave him the last message that he had fought all his life for his country, and he had no doubt that India would be free soon. But when he recounted this incident to Ayar, the location shifted to the hospital. Minor discrepancy. Again, the end was near, and very soon Netaji breathed his last. According to Habib, it was around 9 p.m. Nakamura's account is close enough, between 9 and 9:30. Understandable. These are minor variations and can be completely understood. Dr. Yoshimi said shortly after 8 p.m. As a doctor, he should have remembered the time of death because he was required to write a death certificate. But the same Dr. Yoshimi, when he was interrogated by the War Crimes Liaison Officer in 1946, gave out the time as 11 p.m. That 11 p.m. came down to around 8 p.m. by 1956. Minor discrepancy. The problem arose with Suruta. When Suruta was interrogated by Colonel Feggs, he protested vehemently. He said it cannot be 11 p.m. It was just after 7 p.m. And he remembered categorically that it was still daylight outside. Strange, no? These minor discrepancies. Now you have some idea what kind of eyewitness, what kind of evidence that we have been talking all about. Now the plot thickens and more twists enter the story. First, let's quickly recapitulate what Habib said to the Shahnawaz Khan committee about the immediate aftermath of Netaji's death. That night, Habib requested Juichi Nakamura to go back to the army headquarters in Taihoku and tell them to make arrangements for taking Netaji's body back to Singapore. The key members of the provisional government of Azad Hind and the INA were all there in Singapore. Before we go on, there is one point that we must take note of because it stands out as incredible. The Supreme Commander, their leader, their Netaji, is dead. And we see no effort on the part of Habibur Rahman to contact his comrades, either in Saigon or in Singapore. He just passes on a message to Nakamura to be conveyed to the headquarters. Wouldn't it be natural for him to get in touch with his closest comrades? Wouldn't it be natural for him to report the entire incident to the person who is in charge of the Azad Hind movement at that time, MZ Kiani? When the next morning, that is on the 19th, Nakamura arrived with some Japanese army officers, Habib again placed his request to them to make arrangements so that the body can be flown to Singapore. The Japanese officer reassured Habib that it will be done. Shortly thereafter, Netaji's body was put inside a coffin which arrived from the headquarters. The lid of the coffin was nailed. It was closed. This happened, according to Habib, in the afternoon. Now, Habib claimed that he sent back Nakamura in the evening to the army headquarters again to place the same request about making arrangements for Netaji's body to be taken to Singapore. And after some time, Nakamura returned to Habib and informed that the body cannot be taken because a coffin cannot be put inside a bomber. Now, Nakamura said something very, very different. He said that he didn't come to the hospital in the morning of the 19th August at all. He came in the afternoon, around 1 or 2 p.m. By that time, Netaji's body had already been put inside the coffin. And he never gave any hint that Habib ever asked him to convey a message to the headquarters, or that he sent him to the headquarters to talk to them about transporting Netaji's body to Singapore. Instead, Nakamura said that when he arrived at the hospital, Habib told him that the decision was already made to cremate Netaji's body. We are talking about the 19th of August. According to Habib, this decision was taken only on the morning of the 20th of August. We get a completely different picture from Dr. Suruta. Dr. Suruta told Colonel Figgs that the coffin arrived in the midnight, a few hours after Netaji's death, and by the morning of 19th August, it had been taken away. To the Shahnawaz Khan committee, Suruta said the body remained on the bed the whole night of the 18th, 19th, and that the coffin was brought in on the 19th, and after putting the body in the 19th, in the coffin, it remained there for the next 2-3 days. Suruta had also been interrogated by the Japanese government in 1955. During that interrogation, he claimed that he was not there when the body was put inside the coffin. He claimed that several days later, when he was walking through the corridor of the hospital, he found the coffin in a special room. So Suruta to Figgs, Suruta to the Japanese government, and Suruta to the Shahnawaz Khan committee. Reading his statements raised the question whether it is the same person. Well, of course, the person is the same, it is Dr. T. Suruta. But then, such wide divergence, can we call this just failing of memory? Can we call these minor discrepancies? Dr. Yoshimi added further twist. When interrogated in the Stanley jail in Hong Kong by the War Crimes Liaison Officer, Dr. Yoshimi told him that after Bose's body was put inside the coffin, it was taken to the airport for transporting it to Japan. But then for some unknown reason, it was brought back to the hospital. This is not something that Dr. Yoshimi heard from somebody else, but he had a conversation with Warrant Officer Nishi, who was in charge of this movement of the coffin. Warrant Officer Nishi informed Dr. Yoshimi that the coffin was taken to the Taihoku airport and brought back for some unknown reason. But there is much more, so hang on. Don't be impatient. Now we come to one of the most critical and equally confusing stages of this entire chain of events, the death certificate. Who issued the death certificate and when? This aspect is critical because it completely exposes the hollow claim of irrefutable evidence about Netaji's death. It exposes all the lies that are still being told till this date. During his interrogation in 1946, Dr. Yoshimi told his interrogator that after the coffin was brought back from the Taihoku airport, he issued a death certificate. He didn't mention the name in which the death certificate was issued, the 20th of August, when he issued the death certificate. And in that certificate, he wrote the causes of death to be extensive burning and shock. The story had, however, changed by the time Yoshimi reached the Shahnawaz Khan committee. Here he said that he issued the death certificate on the night of the 18th. And in this case, he specified that, and after issuing the death certificate, he handed it over to the officer in charge from the army headquarters. This is not only in contradiction to his statement in 1946 that he had issued the death certificate on the 20th. In 1946, he had also said that he was warned by the army officers not to divulge the name of the dead person. If that is true, he couldn't have issued the death certificate on the 18th. Because he says that on the 18th night, in the death certificate that he issued, he clearly stated the name as Chandra Bose. And everybody knew who Chandra Bose was. Now, since Yoshimi told the Shahnawaz Khan committee that he had issued the death certificate in the name of Chandra Bose on the 18th night, his former assistant, Dr. Suruta, said that he had not issued any death certificate. Neither was he aware whether Dr. Yoshimi issued any certificate or not. Now, here comes the biggest twist in the tale. Just a year before, or a few months before, Suruta spoke with the Shahnawaz Khan committee and told them that he did not issue any death certificate. He had told the Japanese government interrogation that it was he who had issued the death certificate. Now, do we call this minor discrepancy? What he told the Japanese government interrogators is this. Several days after the death of Mr. Bose, at the army headquarters' sudden request to write a death certificate, I issued it in my name. Being concerned that if identification of the body had been found out at Mr. Bose, it would have turned out bad, the army headquarters told me not to write Mr. Bose's name in the death certificate. I gave a false Japanese name of Hachiro Okura. So as it stands, if we leave out every other complication, we find that Yoshimi issued one death certificate in the name of Chandra Bose and signed it, and Suruta issued a death certificate in the name of Hachiro Okura and signed it himself. So we get conflicting statements about death certificate from the two doctors. Let's call it a minor discrepancy. Now, as it happened, these death certificates were never found. A very convenient excuse was given by everybody who supported the death in the plane crash theory. And that has been a very convenient excuse even by eminent historians. Oh, but it was the time of World War. Japan had surrendered. Everything was in a turmoil. Nobody knew what was going on. And so they might have been lost or destroyed. It's very convenient because whenever something is not found, this excuse is dug out and put as the defense. Now, the trouble for the peddlers of irrefutable evidence came from a completely different angle and probably not anticipated by anyone. These were the crematorium records. According to the local laws of the time, for cremation, a permit had to be acquired. And to be issued a cremation permit, it was essential to produce the death certificate. This cremation permit was brought out for the first time by our investigative journalist, the propagator of irrefutable evidence, Harin Shah. Harin Shah brought back the doctor's report as well as the cremation permit, and he published it in his book. Now, both these documents were issued in the name of Okara Ichiro, who was described as a soldier in the Formosan army who died on the 19th of August at 4 p.m. of heart attack. And Yoshimi had said that he had issued the certificate in the name of Chandra Bose. So ridiculous was this story that even G.D. Khosla had to reject it. And I must quote G.D. Khosla on this point. He wrote in his report, "It follows that the two documents have no evidentiary value at all, and neither of them proves or disproves anything. They relate to a totally different person and not Bose at all." But Khosla was a clever man. He understood the implication of this piece of evidence. So instead of taking it forward, dealing with it further, he completely put a cover on this. He put a lid. He refused to take it as an evidence at all. And it remained so, again, as an irrefutable evidence for the plane crash supporters until Justice Manoj Kumar Mukherjee actually exposed the whole chain of fraud. Firstly, he exposed the fraud about the death certificate. And this was done with the help of Dr. Purabi Roy. One Japanese gentleman by the name of Toshikazu Shimoda wrote to Dr. Roy that he had received a copy of Netaji's death certificate signed by Dr. Yoshimi. This was produced in front of Justice Mukherjee Commission. And as luck would have it, Dr. Yoshimi deposed in front of the commission. Now, this death certificate was issued in the name of Chandra Bose, but it was issued in 1988. When Dr. Yoshimi was shown this certificate, he admitted that it was a copy, but had no recollection of when and how he issued it. So clearly, a fraud was being perpetrated, which was exposed by the Mukherjee Commission. Justice Mukherjee also exposed the next level of hoax, that with the cremation permit. Now, reason follows that if a death certificate was essential for the issuance of a cremation certificate, the names would tally. So if the death certificate was issued in the name of Chandra Bose, the name in the cremation permit would also be Chandra Bose. But that was not the case. The name was always Okara Ichiro or Ichiro Okura, spelled in various ways. To get over this problem, Justice Mukherjee requested the government of Taiwan to share all the records of cremation permits issued between 18th and 24th August 1945. The Taiwan government sent all the records asked for. Not only was the name of Chandra Bose absent from that register, but surprise, surprise, not even the co-passengers of Netaji, who were claimed to have died in that plane crash, featured in that register. They had as if just vanished. Nobody had seen their bodies, nobody knew where they were cremated, and there were no records. It had been claimed that the pilot and General Shide had died inside the plane, along with the crash, just at the moment of the crash. And even a death certificate was later found in the name of General Shide. But nobody seemed to have seen General Shide. Where did his body disappear? Where was he cremated? There is no record of his cremation. One can argue, for the sake of argument, that Netaji's identity was being covered up for some time. But there was no such restriction on Shide. His name wasn't changed. So where were his cremation records? What about the others who died? As I said in the beginning of this video, that all those who were going to Manchuria and those who were required to take them to Manchuria had died and vanished. No record about them existed. So all these contradictions, discrepancies, can they be termed, categorized as minor discrepancies? Can they be attributed to failing memory of the participants? I don't think any sane person would claim that, other than those who support the plane crash theory. But these people were not blind. This kind of contradiction is so apparent, so visible to anybody who cares to study the documents. Why then did the Shanwas committee paper over these problems? How could the Khosla Commission ignore these glaring problematic areas? Well, there is always a method in madness. And let's have a quick look how the Shanwas committee and the Khosla Commission ignored all these problem areas. The standard approach taken by the Shanwas committee was to ignore these differences. So we find repeated assertions throughout the report, assertions like these. There is sufficient material to believe that the plane carrying Netaji crashed at Taihoku airfield. There is no reason to disbelieve the large number of witnesses, both Japanese and non-Japanese. Notwithstanding discrepancies and variations, which are only too likely after the lapse of so many years, the statements of witnesses must be taken as worthy of credit. The whole discussion till now would make it clear that these arguments, these grounds are absolutely spurious and are just an attempt to forcibly prove that the plane crash happened and Netaji died in it. G.D. Khosla also made similar assumptions. Wherever he could not find any reason to support his preconceived conclusion, he put up assumptions, his own assumptions, in the garb of reasoning. For instance, when he had to answer the question that why there was a delay in the announcement of Netaji's death, he manufactured the answer. He explained that the delay was because the Japanese did not want the Americans to intercept their messages. So there was no declaration, there was no announcement, there was no communication. He obviously didn't think of explaining in the same line how come then messages were relayed to Saigon, to General Isoda in real time. A message that can be relayed to Saigon can't be relayed to Tokyo. That was the level or the standard of Justice Khosla's arguments. Another example of his assumption being parroted as reasoned argument is when he wrote in his report, I am not prepared to accept the contention that the entire military organization of Japan had entered into a conspiracy to put forward a false story in order to cover up Bose's escape. So he was not prepared to accept an argument because of his own assumptions. And this is the foundation of his conclusion. Khosla made sweeping assumptions like this about Yoshimi. In his report, he wrote, the important point is that there was no reason whatsoever for Yoshimi to make up a wholly false story and depose to it on oath. This is an assumption. This is not a fact. This is not a point of evidence. This is an assumption. And when so many discrepancies started emerging, he covered them up by saying, the discrepancies to which counsel have drawn my attention to do not falsify the story of the crash. They are due to the passage of time and memory of witnesses becoming somewhat vague regarding the matters of detail. In other words, minor discrepancies. So the whole story is standing on the shoulder of these few arguments, that the discrepancies are minor, so they can be overlooked, that with passage of time, memories have faded, and third, that because it was at the end of the war when Japan had surrendered, everything was topsy-turvy, and therefore it's wrong to expect organized documentary support. All these three are absolutely spurious arguments. Rubbish.